Fire and Emergency Services Instructor, 8th Edition. Chapter 6, Classroom Instruction, Part 1.
This is chapter number 6, Classroom Instruction. We're looking at 135 slides in this chapter, so we're slated to cover this chapter over the next 3 days. So my intentions are to get as far as we can in the chapter tonight, and then clear up for skills practice later in the week and also on Saturday. So I'm still looking at the schedule for the weekend. If you guys can kind of plan to make it for the Tuesday and the Saturday, or the Thursday and the Saturday portion of the course, that way we can knock out some of these learning activities and things that need to be done, that would be great. If you can't make it, you can't make it, and I totally understand, but there are some times we're going to need to have you guys in the classroom so that we can go over presentations and things like that, because I do not want you to be holding the bag at the end of the course when we have the state skills test. So, rearrange my windows around here for a moment. Again, if anybody else is on the webinar, I see Kevin, I see Leah, I see Jordan, I see Sheldon. If anyone else is on the webinar this evening, please send me an email, shoot me a text, shoot me a Facebook message, let me know. That way you can get credit for the course. I will start grading homework sometime tomorrow afternoon. If you have any issues between now and then, let me know and we can talk about them. I'd prefer we talk about them before class ends tonight, but that's the way it goes sometimes. So, Chapter 6, Classroom Instruction. Learning objective number 1, discuss interpersonal communication. Learning objective number 2, discuss the important elements of nonverbal communication in the classroom. We need to know the characteristics of interpersonal communication. We have casual language, we have casual nonverbal clues, we have frequent changes of the speaker and the listener, we have spontaneous communication, and that all encircles interpersonal communication with each other. So, when we talk about casual nonverbal clues, what are we looking at? Throwing your hands up. Body language, Jeff? Okay, Jacob? Inflection, tone. Nonverbal clues, we've got body language, of course. You see a lot of eyes off. When you look down at the class or towards the class and they're not looking at you, chances are you've lost them somewhere. So figure out real quick where you've lost them so you can go back, pick them up, and carry them back through the course. Webinar, anything? Right. Frequent changes of the speaker and the listener. So when we're talking, when I'm engaging someone in the classroom and we're talking, I'm going to say what I have to say, and then I'm going to listen to hear what they have to say. So this is very critical at this point in time, at this stage, because you have to kind of read your class and you have to know where they're at with the material, not just grade-wise, but comfort-wise. You have to know where they're at with the material, so you can, like I said earlier, go back through it and revisit it for them, or anything like that. So we've got 5 basic elements of interpersonal communication. We have the sender, we have the message, we have the receiver, we have the feedback to the sender, and we have interference. So right now I am acting in the role of being the sender. I'm disseminating information to you in a form and fashion of a message so that you, the student, can receive it. And while you're receiving that information through nonverbal cues and through other things like that, there will be feedback sent to the sender. And then you have interference that kind of blocks that up. So what would an example of interference be? Toned out for the big one. Jimmy Linder. Okay. Jacob, anything? other things going on in the classroom besides. Kevin says Facebook. While you're on Facebook, of course. Cell phones, Facebook, texting. Those are all huge. Good job, guys. Good job for picking those up. That was interference. So as an instructor, we are responsible for relaying a message. So your instructor, they receive feedback, they decode feedback, they determine the meaning of the feedback, they react to the feedback. To begin with, they interpret the lesson plan, they encode the meaning of the lesson, and they transmit the lesson. So then you go through what's called your barrier of influence. You have one for the instructor, you have one for the student. So the instructor movements can be a barrier of interference. Other students' movements, visual aids, note-taking, reaction to the lesson, personal thoughts, and classroom background noise. So on the other end, the student receives the lesson's transmission, they decode the lesson, they determine the meaning of the lesson, and they react to the lesson. So then your student encodes feedback and transmits feedback. All that passes back through to the instructor. His or her barriers at that point in time are the lesson plan, the visual aids, the visual aid equipment, the student movements, student feedback, personal thoughts, and classroom background noise. So the instructor is then going to receive the feedback, decode the feedback, determine the meaning of the feedback, and react to the feedback. And the circle continues from when the instructor is teaching to the students are receiving. The students transmit their feedback, and the instructor interprets that feedback and makes adjustments where necessary in his or her lesson plan. Does that make sense? Everybody's good with that so far? Jeff, you good? Jacob? So we go in a cyclical form and fashion. Let's see, Dilly, C plus, C minus, precisely. Instructors need to watch for nonverbal cues from students. So these are the three big ones right here I'm looking for. I'm looking for people that are distracted, I'm looking for people that are confused, and I'm looking for people that lost interest. So what do you think, what are some nonverbal cues that you guys can think of that I'm looking for, or that we're looking for when we're teaching? Yep. Got a student on a cell phone. Daydreaming or not paying attention. How would you determine that in a student? Perfect. Perfect. So Wes had two answers there. He said, run those by me back real quick again so I can restate them. Gotcha. So basically get immediate feedback from the last slide. And then you had another good one, which was daydreaming. So you're going to see your student kind of looking up and around. They're spacing out. They're looking out the window. They're doing all exactly. They're in the back of the room snoring like some folks are. Now, reading ahead's not that bad of a thing sometimes. Hey, the grades say he's okay, so we're good. We're good right there. Looking elsewhere, body language, eye contact, not making eye contact, yawning. Those are some good nonverbal cues. So we need to know the purposes of interpersonal communication. Learning, what we're doing now. Relating, kind of linking up information together and taking someone else's thoughts on a particular subject into effect. Influencing, see a lot of politicians attempt to do this. Playing, and helping. So what are the 5 basic elements of interpersonal communication in the classroom? We need to go back.
Learning, relating, playing.
There you go, sir. There you are. So use the following guidelines to improve your verbal communication. Engage in dual perspective. So don't just look at your own perspective, look at other people's perspectives. Take responsibility for your personal feelings and thoughts. Show respect for the feelings and thoughts of the other person. Try to gain accuracy and clarity in speaking. Be aware of any special needs of the receiver. Avoid speaking or addressing a problem while you're angry or emotional. So what are some guidelines for verbal communication skills? We just talked about them in the previous slide. Jeff? Engage? Wes? Okay, let's go back. Take responsibility for feelings and thoughts. Be aware of any special needs of the receiver. Don't act on your emotions. Perfect. Show respect for others, feelings and thoughts of others. Yes, yes. We're good there. Be aware of any special needs. Thank you, Leah. Nonverbal communication consists of tone and inflection in body language. And this is just exactly what we were talking about. So let us see why inflection is a nonverbal form of communication. So we're talking about message components here. You've got a 55% of your component of body language. You got 38% vocal tone and inflection, and you got 7% worth of words. Personally, I think tone and inflection would be a verbal element of communication. I'm sure quite a few of us in the classroom feel the same way. But for the purposes of the material, we will say that in the test, because there's a question on the test, we will refer to vocal tone, inflection, body language, and words all as nonverbal form, or vocal tone and inflection, body language as nonverbal communication. So remember that for the test. Do not kind of get that mixed up. Good nonverbal communication consists of various components. Eye contact, facial expression. Right now, everybody's on pace. Everybody's good. Everybody's smiling. They're looking like they're engaged. They're looking like they know what's going on. We're good there. Gestures. You have some people that use a lot of gestures. You have some people that don't use gestures at all. But there are some times where you can actually get to a situation where those gestures are actually becoming interference and blocking the signal from being sent. Posture. Instead of slouching, sit up, stand up straight. Poise. Vocal characteristics. Tone of voice. Message being conveyed. Vocal interferences. What's a vocal interference? Someone interrupting. Wes, vocal influences or vocal interferences?
Somebody getting a phone call?
Phone call. Throat clearing. Use of the word and a lot. Personal appearance is a big one. Touch. Don't know how far I'd go with that one in some fire service crowds. And proximity. Dual perspective. Or. So what are the 3 elements of nonverbal communication? Body language, vocal tone inflection, and words. Learning objective number 3, discuss the practice of good listening skills in the classroom. Students spend the majority of class time listening. Up to 75% of class time is spent listening. Now we're going to have to update that one a little bit since you're seeing a lot of instructors using flipped classrooms and alternative deployment materials. But up to 75% of the class time prior to all the new technology changes is spent listening. listening to someone instruct, listening to somebody lecture. So you have to learn how to listen. It's an active process. You have attending, where you're going to focus on the speaker. You have understanding, which is decoding the message. You have remembering, where information is retained. You have evaluating, where you critically analyze information. And you have responding, when you indicate the information has been understood. What's a good nonverbal way to identify that the information has been understood? Okay. Head nod. Thumbs up. Shaking your head slightly in agreement. Perfect. So how does an instructor use good listening skills in the classroom? We've talked about why it's important for students. Now let's talk about why it's important for instructors. Any ideas, guys? Listening to their opinion. Kevin says they care. What else? Anybody? Answering questions. Posing questions to the students to see if the information has been uptaken yet. So on and so forth. Learning objective number 4. Explain presentation techniques that most effectively communicate information to students. So you need to know the characteristics of effective speakers. They are audience-centered. They have a good development of ideas and a good organization of ideas. They have the best choice of words, and they have good delivery skills. They have vocal characteristics. They have a conversational tone. They have a positive attitude. They have an appropriate use of humor. And be yourself. We're going to go back and listen to the video.
Whenever I talk about incident command system, I always talk about when I got on the fire service in the early 80s, we would have a critique. We'd have a big fire and we'd have a critique. We'd all gather up in this little room, and at that time all the chiefs wore white shirts, gold badges, and they all walked around the room and they said, "You don't know how to squirt water on a fire. You don't know how to drive a fire truck. You don't know how to set up a ladder." When really, as we evolved into the incident command system, we figured out that those guys really didn't know how to manage an incident. So we've become a lot more sophisticated in that area in managing incidents. When we set up the incident command system, when we get to that hazmat incident, we need to set up the incident command system. We need a list of priorities. The priorities are life safety, property conservation, and incident stabilization and property conservation. Now these are our priorities, but they're not just priorities that we repeat. LIP is what everybody uses. So everybody says, "What are our priorities, LIP?" No, they are a decision-making guide. Life safety. Are responders safe? How do we take care of at this hazmat incident, the people that are in the hot zone? How do we make them safe? We're going to send some rescuers in and pull them out of the hot zone. We're going to do emergency decontamination, blah blah blah. We've taken care of life safety. Incident stabilization. How do we make this incident stop getting bigger? How do we make this hazmat incident keep causing damage? We put out the fire, we stop the leak, we dam the runoff, we keep the dangerous chemical from getting in the stream. We've stabilized the incident by the time we get that done. So it's a decision-making guide. We get down to, after we've stopped all that, now how do we protect the property and the environment? How do we protect it? We've got some runoff in this dirt in the side of the road. We've got runoff there. How do we take care of that? Well, we have to dig it all out. We put it in drums. We take care of it. So when you're talking about ICS, don't say, "What are the incident priorities, LIP?" It's these things as a decision-making guide that we have to take care of life safety first. We stop the incident from causing more damage, and then we protect the property and the environment that's involved. Assessments to make before taking action. Before we rush in, what are some of the assessments we have to make? Well, what's the risk to us as rescuers? What is the risk? Is the benefit of going into that hot zone worth the risk to us? And along with that, the ability of the rescuers to protect themselves. Are we on scene with a bunch of hazmat technicians, or is everybody at the first responder awareness level and they don't have the ability to go in and protect themselves? So that assessment changes our incident action plan, doesn't it? We're not going to send them into a dangerous area when they can't protect themselves. Probability of the rescue and the difficulty of the rescue. All this comes down to risk-benefit, doesn't it? When we sign on as firemen, we signed on, well, I might risk my life to save a life. That's a benefit. I can go in. The probability of a rescue, even if it's pretty risky for me, I'm a fireman. That's what I do. I'm going to go try to get them out. But I'm not going to risk my life to make sure that dirt doesn't get contaminated, or the hard thing to say, if we know that somebody's already deceased in that hot zone, I'm not going to risk my life to go pull them out. So the probability that there is a rescue or that we can make a successful rescue, and the difficulty of that rescue. Some other assessments, the capabilities and resources of the on-scene forces. We can make this fancy, big, wild incident action plan that includes the regional hazmat teams and hazmat techs and having a chemist on scene, and we set up this big incident command system. If we don't have all that there, that incident action plan is not going to work. Who do we have there? How can we make the plan work with what we have?
So what do you guys think about that? How is he being an effective speaker? Come on, don't be bashful. How is he being an effective speaker? Let's go back, let's look at this. What was his topic? Okay. Incident command. So what kind of a group do you think he was lecturing to? Okay. Chief, what do you think? Okay. Potentially new firefighters, They weren't in uniform, so they may be volunteers or something of that nature. Les, you got anything to chime in on? Okay. Jacob. Moving on. You should plan it for your presentations. You should practice the delivery. Before you go in and teach something, you should go through and make sure you know where all the stumbly spots are going to be. So that way, when you need to refer to the book, you have the book there, you're ready to refer to it. You walk over, you grab the textbook, you look, you deliver. You make sure that you've practiced that delivery. Make a video recording and review it. So all of these recordings that I've actually taken of this entire course, I've gone back through and I've re-edited them to make sure that the way I'm teaching, or to make sure that I get all the annoying little audio things out of it. But at the same time, I'm reviewing my inflection, my tone, my diction, whether the information was passed correctly, whether, I'm looking to make sure my own skills are okay. You must make sure the materials are complete, in order, and correct. You have to ensure that the presentation is logical in its sequence. You have to get plenty of rest the night before. You have to do some relaxation before a training session. You kind of have to just sit down and decompress and not worry about the presentation or the session as much. Just kind of Get yourself in a mind frame where your mind is clear and you're ready to teach. Select comfortable clothing and anticipate potential problems. Oral presentations generally consist of 3 parts: the opening, the body, and the summary. Alrighty, let's move on. The sequence depends upon the topic and the organization of your lesson plan. You go from the known information to the unknown information. You go from simple to complex. You go whole, part whole, or you go step by step. So when you prepare a lesson, you want to use several techniques. You want to show physical examples. You want to diagram a complete set of ideas. You want to use demonstrations in modeling, and you want to build motivation. So in the skills drills that we just did, you guys showed the physical example. You used demonstration modeling or just showing the equipment, and then built motivation because you actually learned something from Chief Allison's lecture, and as did I. I didn't know what some of those buttons were for. So that's something you want to work for when you're actually preparing your lesson and getting ready to discuss. You want to use transitions to move students from one portion of the lesson to the next without losing their attention. You want to maintain their interest. You want to maintain continuity, maintain consistency, establish relationships, provide previews, and provide summaries. So you'll notice that in this course, typically what we do is we will go through a section, or we'll go through an objective, and then there will be a learning question or a review question or two to make sure that you guys have got the material and we're paying attention throughout the lecture. That also is a transition for me to move from one lesson objective to another lesson objective. You got to know when to effectively use your transitions. When you end one topic and begin another. When you end a complete lesson within a course. When you start a new lesson within a course. When you move from one teaching method into another. And when you provide rest breaks. So we took a break there for a few moments, and then you guys put your things together for your presentations. But you have to provide rest breaks. It's not given that anybody will be able to sit through an entire 2-hour lecture without getting bored, without spacing out. So you have to make sure you provide rest breaks in there. So build that in the material when you create your content. Make sure you've got space for rest breaks. Make sure you've got your transitions easily identified so you can move from one topic to another. You've got verbal transitions and you've got nonverbal transitions. There are several helpful common transitions. In addition to, in other words, as well, therefore, in summary, and not only. These all signal the student that you're getting ready to move from one piece of information to the next piece of information. Nonverbal transitions consist of several components. A change of facial expression, a pause, a change in vocal pitch or rate of speaking, a gesture, or physically moving from one point to another. So we're talking about transitions. What would you use as a transition, Wes?
You can use a
Slight pause. Jeff? A gesture. Jacob? Same thing. Chief Allison? Webinar? Anybody got any feedback? Some transitions can cause a disturbance. Altering the light level, turning on audio-visual equipment, or assembling a model. So if you've got the lights in the room dimmed so everybody can focus on the projection screen and everything that's on the projector. And you come in and you just flip the lights on. It'll startle some of your students. Recommend a slight change in the light level if at all possible. Audio visual equipment, I always make sure that mine is turned on, and then I have a button on my presenter that'll take the screen black and then turn it back on as well. Or assembling a model, that needs to be done before class. That way you're not taking class time to assemble something because you were not prepared. So what are some characteristics of effective speakers? Getting class interaction, keeping them interested and motivated. Jeff? Motivation. Chief Allison? Good verbal transitions with the flow. Good eye contact. Keeping them entertained. That's a big one. You know, 15, 20 years ago, we didn't care about keeping people entertained. Because you were there to teach, by God. You were there to pass information. Emotion. But as we've had more time to study and learn about the science and art of learning, we've been able to kind of hone our skills and hone our edge to get that accomplished. Enunciating, thank you, Sheldon. Appreciate it. Objective 5. Discuss the characteristics of the mastery approach to teaching as it relates to the fire and emergency services. So here's the mastery approach to teaching for the fire service. It is competency-based. There are job performance. It is competency-based. There are very specific things that have to be accomplished in job performance requirements. It's individual-based. So you're teaching sometimes the individual. You have immediate specific feedback. You have modules and multimedia. It is instructor supported. There are specific objectives, and there are criterion referenced testing. I would note this down because this is likely to be a test question somewhere, either state or the class. Yes. Slide 34. There you go. Learning objectives are written to establish the criteria for mastery. You have a behavior component, you have a conditions component, and you have a degree component. So what do you think we're talking about when we say we have a behavior objective? The student should exist a certain kind of behavior after the skill is taught, perhaps? Conditions, what do those sound like? The student has to meet certain criteria and qualifications at the end of that lecture or at the end of that session, yes? And the degree, is it beginner, is it advanced, is it intermediate? Know the advantages and the disadvantages to the mastery approach to teaching. Advantages. Students are prepared to advance to more complex knowledge. We saw this day one in the Salman Khan video, where he had that roadmap and he could show where each and every single student in that program, he could show which skills they had, which skills they needed, and when those skills were taken care of and learned. The knowledge that the student possessed before the course is used as a building block for new skills. So, for example, we require in the state of Indiana that all Instructor 1 candidates must have Firefighter 1 and Firefighter 2, because that is the basic curriculum for certifying firefighters in this state. So as we go back to throwing ladders or the Chicago tool, the New York tool, the Halligan bar, the radio, the flathead axe. The students should have, in this particular class, they should have some sort of reference for all those things to build upon. Students are made aware of the learning objectives before beginning, and that's something that this new curriculum does very well, is it will tell us what we're working on before we work on it, and then we wrap it up with a review question. And then time is given to tailor learning. So, for example, if you're teaching a course here at Brooklyn, you're going to want to make sure you hit both the older guys and the younger guys, just to make sure that everybody's got something for them in that presentation. But you have time to set that up and to make sure you've got your learning set up accordingly. Disadvantages. Instructors must plan to provide extra time to ensure that all students master the subject. The instructor must teach at the pace of the students in the class. Faster students may feel that the slower members of the class are holding them back. A wide variety of training materials must be available to meet the learning needs. So, and I know I draw a lot of comparisons to this course, but I do find it's appropriate. We built in according to the state template, we built in some extra time to make sure you guys would have time to get through all the sessions and all the skills at that point in time. I'm teaching at the pace of who's here and who's on the webinar as well. So we're dealing with slightly advanced personnel. We're not dealing with fresh personnel, but we're dealing with folks that know about the fire service and they know how the fire service works. I don't really think that we have anybody that's being held back because you guys are doing your stuff on your own. You guys are doing your tests on your own, your quizzes on your own. It's kind of a learn at your own pace thing. And then we've also put in a wide variety of training materials, skill drills, learning activities, tests, quizzes, videos, slides, web pages, all that good stuff. That's all been built into the course. But you'll find that the reason why we use the mastery learning is to make sure that we get everybody taken care of when we teach a topic. So in a nutshell, what's the mastery approach to teaching? Put it in your own words. Okay. Teach to the students, so no child is left behind. Okay. Jacob? Learning capabilities of students. Sheldon says relating to your students. Chief, you anything to add? Competency-based learning. That's a big one for the fire service. At what point in time do you release a new EMT to the street or a new firefighter to the street? What kind of objectives do they have to meet? And then making sure those objectives are clearly identified. Kevin says students to have a better understanding of the outcome. Thank you, sir. You guys are always on point on that. Describe the four-step method of instruction. The syllabus came straight from the curriculum, and this is something we specifically mentioned in the syllabus on the first day of class. It's a widely accepted structure of teaching a lesson. You have your preparation, you have your presentation, you have your application, and you have your evaluation. So, for example, the exercises we just did. I gave you guys 10 minutes to prepare. You presented your information to the class. You applied it to the class. And then we made the video for evaluation downstream. So you guys can actually look at your videos and see what you need to work on. Everybody did well. Some content things that we probably need to work on a little, but that's okay. Do you guys think they went all right? Okay. Wes? Jeff? Chief Allison knocked it out of the park on the radios, though, so. Right. But that's okay. That's okay. But you're gonna use that 4-step method as you progress as an instructor, as an instructor 1, as an instructor 2, 3. It's always going to be about that 4-point or the 4-step method of teaching. Preparation refers to preparing the students to learn. Step number 1, preparation. To prepare the students to learn. Accomplished through tested methods for preparing students to learn. So you're going to prepare the mind of students by creating attention, curiosity, interest, and desire. And then you're going to create a foundation for learning. You're going to associate student experiences with the lesson content. Very first night, I asked you guys to introduce yourselves. You did that. We were building a foundation to get your experiences tied in with the lesson contents. We created attention, curiosity, interest, and desire. You guys obviously had to have some interest to take the course in the first place because, you know, sometimes this can be a dry topic, and I've done my best to make sure it's not that dry for you. But you got to prepare, you have to make sure your students are prepared to learn. Even if that means sending them an email a week until the course starts. Generate that enthusiasm. Engage your class before you actually get in to teach it. Now, as far as the methods for preparing students to learn, generate curiosity by asking rhetorical questions or questions that cause students to relate personal experiences to the topic. You create attention by including a personal experience, analogy, or topic-related story. Kind of like war stories. Sometimes we have a lot of war stories in the fire service. Smoke signals and semaphore. Brilliant. Generate desire by citing the personal benefits associated with mastering the knowledge and skills. So when you guys are done with Fire Instructor 1, you should be able to gain personal benefit, whether it's going on to get Instructor 2, 3, or whether it's being certified as an Officer 1, or working on your department as an adjunct instructor. Those are all desires that are created. You create interest by presenting new concepts, procedures, or equipment. And that was why the very first video I had you guys watch was Con and the approach to learning. Because I wanted that to kind of frame the entire course and generate the idea that fire service education is changing. It's no longer standing up in front of the class lecturing for half an hour and then expecting everybody to have it down. It's multidisciplinary, it's multifaceted, and you have to use different techniques to kind of break through to your students. You create continuity by reviewing previous lessons. Every time we start out, I ask, any questions over the material? Anything you guys uncomfortable with? And then you determine student knowledge by conducting diagnostic quizzes or pre-tests. So I can tell where I need to adjust the course based upon how you guys are answering your test and your quiz questions and doing all the activities. Step number 2, presentation. The instructor presents the lesson content in an orderly or sequential outline. The purpose: to communicate content developed to change the behavior of students. Present knowledge, new skills, concepts, or procedures to students. Instruct, motivate, and educate students. How to accomplish: tested methods of presenting knowledge and skills. Select the appropriate presentation style for the audience, subject, and desired outcome. So let's talk about presentation style for a minute. Let's say you're in an engine company and you're getting ready to discuss a new tool that's just been put on the rig. What kind of thoughts do you guys have on the appropriate presentation for that skill? Bring the tool in. Circle of chairs. Perfect. Jeff? Do your research on the tool. Make sure you know what you're talking about. Wes? Handle it. See what it's all about. Perfect. Questions? All right. Video from the manufacturer. Kevin, good point. Present lectures, demonstrations, and activities. So if you guys haven't noticed, I lecture about as much as necessary, and then we do the rest of it either on your own or in class. Just not sitting up here lecturing for 4 or 5 hours. Use appropriate visual aids and props. Explain procedures. Emphasize the key points. Explain concepts, philosophies, principles, and implications. Proceed from known to unknown and simple to complex. Use textbooks and other reference materials. Apply active learning principles. Summarize key points and concepts at the end of the presentation and require students to take notes. Students learn through activities, exercises, discussions, work groups, skill practices, and other activities. So you're on to step number 3, application. Provide the opportunity for students to apply theory, critical thinking, critical decision-making, or psychomotor skills to practical situations. So what's a psychomotor skill? When we talk about psychomotor, what are we talking about? Hands-on? You just got done with EMT class. What's a psychomotor skill in an EMT class? So you want to demonstrate skills-based knowledge through appropriate means. You want to provide students with the opportunity to perform under supervision. You involve students actively in the learning process. And you provide the opportunity to practice and master critical skills in a non-emergency learning environment. Let's talk about that last one. What kind of, do we typically get a lot of that in our training as firefighters? Or do we need to pick it up on that? Right, do we have to is a question. I'm sure you hear that a lot. Wes, comments? We'd always do a little bit more hands-on. Always room for hands-on as long as it's cost effective. That's a big point right there. What about our EMS precepting process? Do you kind of see now why we precept? What the precept process is? Yes, no, maybe, possibly. How to accomplish creative, organized, and tested methods for presenting and practicing practical skills. Have the students perform the skill or activity under supervision. Observe performances closely. Check and correct errors. Instill correct habits in students. Check key points and safety points. Develop discussions based on theory, decision-making, or skills application. Conduct periodic skills tests. Assign projects and activities. Or assign problems for students to resolve. Very first day of class, we had a situation where we put you guys in a series of ethical situations, and you had to think your way out before being in a classroom. Make sense? We want you to apply everything that you've learned. By applying everything that you've learned, that's how you move forward in the service. Students demonstrate how much they learned through a written, oral, or practical exam. Evaluation, step 4. The purpose is to evaluate the learning process. You want to evaluate your student understanding, and you also want to evaluate teaching effectiveness. How to accomplish? Have students perform the tasks unassisted. Conduct performance tests. Ask prepared questions. Have students demonstrate and explain tasks. Have students observe and critique other student performances. conduct final examinations, evaluate notebooks, projects, assignments, and activities, have students complete the course and instructor evaluation forms, have instructors complete the course evaluation forms themselves. So are you guys kind of seeing how everything's coming together? We take the stuff from R1, we pull it in, we take the lecture, we pull it in, we take personal experience, we pull that in. Is it kind of starting to gel up in your minds as far as the method of the madness here? Because in order to get to this step, we had to talk about all the little theory and all the little environment and everything else around that. This chapter and the next few chapters really start to tie up all that information and put it together. So tests, quizzes, and information like that's huge because that's the way that I can identify what the learning needs are and what we need to address in the review sessions, in the housekeeping sessions, and everything we do. So, questions so far on that? So we go back to what is the four-step method of instruction? Preparation, presentation, application, evaluation. Perfect. Explain instructor-led training approaches to teaching in the fire and emergency services. So you as an instructor must help students maintain their interest throughout the lesson and throughout the course. And here are some strategies for doing that. Relate the learning to the student interests. We're all interested in the fire service, so kind of use that one to your advantage and keep everything related back to fire service and related topics. You need to offer material that pertains to professional goals. So this class is not necessarily an end, but a beginning. That's why it's a prerequisite for Officer 1, just so you have that information and so you can continue on your personal goals to promotion or a merit test or a moving from a combo to a full-time department, things like that. Use humor appropriately. In the fire service, we enjoy our dark humor, and sometimes it's not appropriate. So you want to make sure when you're live in front of the class that you're using it appropriately, so you're not kind of pushing somebody's buttons or, offending somebody in your class. You want to stimulate emotions. You want to stimulate love of a field, or you want to stimulate your students' feelings on learning and education. You want to explain with examples. Use your questions to stimulate interest and make sure everything's fresh. And then use unpredictability and uncertainty. That's a huge one because in the fire service, we have to make sure that we're going to behave in a certain way during unpredictable and uncertain events. And that is why that I assigned a quick drill tonight to have you guys talk 3 minutes on a piece of equipment. So, webinar guys, we'll talk about the makeup for that in a few moments. Other than that, let's move on. Illustrated lecture explains the topic through spoken words and the use of audio-visual aids. So you've got computer-generated slide presentations such as PowerPoint or Keynote, which we use. We have illustrations on dry erase boards or chalkboards. I don't have a real good way of projecting that, so we don't use a lot of that. Drawings and photographs, we use a lot of video, and we use recorded video on DVD or computer. So mix it up. You've got to make sure you're mixing it up for the benefit of your class. Know the recommendations for giving an illustrated lecture. Incorporate time to ask questions. Be prepared to ask questions. Use effective listening skills. And avoid presenting too much information at once. So you want to build in that time to where you can engage the class and ask them questions. Get them engaged. See what they're thinking. Make sure that they're responding to the material and responding appropriately. Ask them questions. Single them out if you have to, but you have to make sure that you're engaging them as well. Ask questions. Use effective listening skills. And obviously at the end, avoid presenting too much information at once. For example, we are looking at about 136 slides worth of material for Chapter 6. It's not my intention to go through all 135 tonight because, number one, I'd be just a total madman and you guys would have way too much information overload. So avoid that at all costs. Provide supplemental information. If you've noticed, we have videos, we have PowerPoints, we have the learning activities. Provide that supplemental information to your students. You want to break your lectures into smaller segments of about 12 to 18 minutes. You want to provide a note-taking guide if necessary. And you also want to have students work in pairs or small groups to compare notes. So use every single tool of the arsenal available to you to get the information out to your students. Here's some ideas. Give students 3 minutes at the end of class to write down everything to remember from the lesson. Provide a clear preview of the information. Include only essential and relevant information. And review frequently after each lecture segment, which we do. Excuse me for one moment. Ways to interact during a discussion. Exchange views and ideas. So if you have a member that has a view, if you've got a different perspective on that, exchange that with him or her. Perhaps that will help him or her down the road. Ask questions and receive answers. You want to make sure that you're checking for information uptake to your students. So ask questions to give you that information. Provide examples based upon experiences. A lot of this in this class has gone back to my personal experience as an instructor over the last 20, 25 years between scouts and the fire service and a whole bunch of different stuff. But I've tried to pepper in my experiences as best as I can so you can draw conclusions and see examples. And I encourage people to do that. It's another way to engage your class. Arrive at conclusions if necessary. Form a consensus if necessary. These can be accomplished through whole group discussion. Share information and knowledge. Apply theories and critical thinking skills. Express personal views and ideas. Collaborate and work as a team. Clarify attitudes, values, and beliefs. You want to know the categories of whole group discussion. You have guided, you have conference. As an instructor, you should not participate in a small group discussion. You want to define the goals for the group, you want to establish time frames for the group, and you want to monitor the groups to make sure your students stay on task. Discussions, both large and small group, require leadership. You have a director, you have a gatekeeper, and you have a timekeeper. So the director is going to keep things moving along. They are going to direct where the discussion is going to go. Your timekeeper is obvious. You're going to make sure that you're keeping track of time. And the gatekeeper kind of gives access to information and kind of does some things to maneuver the discussion where they need to go. Know the techniques that apply to both large and small group discussions. You have brainstorming, you have agenda-based processes, and you have nominal group process. You need to know the preferred method for demonstrating a psychomotor skill. Perform the skill at normal speed so students can see an overview of the skill. Secondly, you want to perform the skill at a slower speed, emphasizing each part individually. And then the third step, perform the skill a third time at normal speed with explanation during performance. But that's very important for making sure your students understand how to perform a psychomotor skill. And we do a lot of psychomotor stuff in the fire service. We do it in EMT school, we do it in the fire service. skills are a big part of what we do, and it's important to make sure that you're teaching them correctly and the students are understanding them so that they can execute and perform the way you expect them to in the field. You have to know the advantages and the drawbacks of demonstrating cognitive and psychomotor domains. The advantage of demonstrating, you get immediate feedback, you observe behavioral changes, your students have a high level of interest, you can determine whether students have achieved the learning objectives and learning skills correctly. The drawback, you must plan for extensive preparation and cleanup time. For example, I make the best attempt to be here as close to 5 o'clock as I can to make sure that I've got enough time to get set up and prepare and be ready to teach on time. You have to have careful lesson planning, and you have to be very organized about it because everything has to be laid out in a certain form or fashion. We go back to the point from the book where we talked about making sure that you had a backup plan for the weather. That goes back to careful lesson planning. Large groups of students require extra equipment, and then skills that must be performed outside depend upon the weather. So in the middle of a January thunderstorm at 8:30 on a January night, we're not going to be out throwing ladders against the side of the building. We're not going to be outside tonight throwing ladders. We're going to be in here in the classroom going over the slides and talking about presentations. You have to know how to motivate and encourage your students. You have to provide quality instruction that helps students that try to learn. You have to provide evidence that student efforts make a difference. You have to establish clear expectations. And you have to provide continuous feedback about student process. There are two methods that we use to reinforce learning. We use repetition and we use behavioral reinforcement. So what's a behavioral reinforcement? What do we commonly use for those in the fire service? Praise. Positive reinforcement. Candy bars go a long way sometimes. You have a student get an answer correctly, toss him a candy bar. Reward. Reward. You have to use questions to receive feedback and stimulate student interest. You have to promote discussion and critical thinking. You have to stimulate interest and arouse curiosity. You have to motivate students to acquire knowledge on their own. You have to assess their level of understanding. And you have to control the behavior of disruptive or non-participating students. That's why I ask a lot of questions. I want people in my classes to be able to talk amongst each other and think critically about it. And I want to throw things in there that interest the students and arouse their curiosity. Give them a reason to learn. Motivate them to go out and acquire knowledge on their own. So, for example, I knew a couple guys were going through a fire investigators course. So I very surreptitiously slid them a copy of InterFire VR, which is a software program that they use to train arson investigators. Now, whether the guy ever used it or not, I don't know, but I assume that he was able to take a look at that and use that disc to hone his own skills as a fire investigator. You want to assess their level of understanding because there's nothing more horrible than going forward about 3 or 4 slides and your students are still 3 slides back. And then you have to control the behavior of disruptive or non-participating students and re-engage them in the class or separate them if necessary. So I think that's as good a point to stop as any tonight. We'll go ahead and pick this up on slide 63 on Thursday. With that said, you guys got a lot of work due tonight at 11, so I'll be around for a few minutes for questions and answers if necessary. The next two lectures, Thursday and Saturday, please try to make it. You guys have your skill drill to do as far as your 3-minute presentation. Also, we'll be talking about some things that are very necessary. We'll be talking about IAC 655. We'll also be talking about the practical and things you need to encounter for the practical. We need to start planning those processes. So with that said, it's 8:35. You guys have a good night. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording the webinar and the streams. And then if you guys have questions, just pop up and we'll go from there. So everybody have a good night. Be safe.
This session is no longer being recorded.